This is going to be a commentary video with no film associated with it that is to address the concerns about the processing and cognitive ability of C.J. Stroud as it relates to the S2 test that a lot of people have never even heard of before the last 5 to 7 days. I get so turned off, me personally, by what happens to certain guys just before the draft. And let me be specific. I mean guys who haven't played a down of football in almost 5 months, who haven't done anything negative character-wise, who have said nothing inflammatory, and there's no incidents that suddenly came out that were hidden for months by their, the college coaches or administration or something like that. And C.J. Stroud, to me, kind of seems to fall into that category. My reaction here, my commentary might be a little simplistic. If it is, feel free to let me know in the comment section. I think to utilize things like the S2 test and Wonderlic and other cognitive or psychological tests as one of the large metrics used to determine whether to pick a guy is just garbage. And it's an indication that there's just garbage people who talk about football players before the draft in some cases. I think it should be a small piece of the puzzle. I don't think it is a large piece of the puzzle, like larger than 5 to 7%. That's my opinion. C.J. Stroud can play. He's a better player today, as I record this on April 22nd, than Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. He just is. He's a better player. There's better film of him. There's more consistent film. His throwing motion is more repeatable and consistent. He delivers the football on time, far better than those two guys. Is it designed plays? Is it plays where he has to get up, before the snap? Okay, is there a certain number of guys over here? I'm going to run the ball the opposite direction. Are there run-pass option plays that make things easy on C.J. Stroud? Sure there are. Guess what, guys? There's those things for everyone. And it seems to me like these things are being weighted more heavily for C.J. Stroud recently. I'm not sure why. All his throws are not, timing routes or look and throw, meaning look there, throw at this guy as soon as he gets open. Wait for him to get open. They're not all designed plays either. You want to see a lot of designed pass plays. You want to see a lot of RPOs, a lot of pre-snap count plays. Go watch the Georgia offense the last couple of years. That's not a knock at Stetson Bennett. That's a compliment for Todd Monken and all the other coaches at Georgia whose names I don't know and don't pretend to know. That's a compliment. That's a good thing that coaches prepare people for those moments. So when you get to play the University of Georgia, a historic defense, a historic program in 2021 and 22, their 2-year run, their repeat national championship run will go down in history. C.J. Stroud lit them up. I'll address that a little bit more later and talk about the statistical anomaly that C.J. Stroud is as it relates to competing against that Georgia defense. And I think that is a larger indicator for NFL front offices than this S2 test. And if it's not, then the Houston Texans are just wrong. And that's why they're the Houston Texans. And the Indianapolis Colts are just wrong. If those two teams pass on C.J. Stroud, primarily because of the S2 test, other cognitive, other psychological assessments, then they're going to pick a player who's inferior to C.J. Stroud, and their franchise and their fans are going to suffer for 6 or 8 years in the future because they're not going to be as effective, and they're going to possibly be in the same situation looking to draft a quarterback sooner than they would have been if they had picked C.J. Stroud in the first place. Look, as it stands, his performance against Georgia was historic. Georgia went 15-0 in 2022. They murked TCU in the national title game, right? Georgia's backups probably could have won the game, or most of their backups. The defense only gave up 300 yards twice in 2022 in 15 games. One of them was their December 3rd win over LSU. Well, it was 50-30, so they won the game by 20. LSU had 500 yards passing. But if you really go, and I did go back and look at it, some of it, Georgia was up 35-10 at halftime. The game was over. LSU got 2 meaningless touchdowns, I think, in the last 11 minutes of the game, something like that. So a lot of that yardage there was insignificant. It was by design. Georgia's coaches were allowing them to throw the ball in front to let the clock run, especially with the way the rules are now with players run out of bounds. You can't just run out of bounds and stop the clock. The only legitimate game that Georgia gave up this year in 2022 with more than 300 yards passing was C.J. Stroud on December 31st in the college football playoff semifinal. He throws 4 touchdowns all over the field. That was without JSN. Marvin Harrison Jr., of course, had a huge impact. I think he had 2 touchdown catches, right? But he wasn't able to finish the game because of the injury in the end zone. Chris Olave was not on the field. He was with the New Orleans Saints. Garrett Wilson was not on the field. He was with the Jets. JSN didn't play at all that night. He only played 3 games in 2022. It's not like CJ Stroud did all that with Marvin Harrison Jr., JSN, Garrett Wilson, and Chris Olave all on the field. Unbelievably overwhelming talent if they were to have those 4 guys all on the field at the same time, which they did in some cases in 2021. I rewatched the Georgia and Michigan games, and actually while I'm doing this commentary video, I got a secondary monitor up, just letting some plays run. I'm just shocked. The beautiful thing about the film that you get for college players now is you get the all-22 angle, and then you get the end zone. Different arm slot throws, different deliveries in terms of the platform, meaning fading away, shifting to his right, moving out of the pocket, stepping up, escaping pressure, particularly in the Georgia game, but I'm letting the Michigan game run as I record this. I made probably 30 notes on different throws, and then I just stopped making notes, and I was like, I know what I want to say. You may disagree with me. That's no problem. You may say, well, Bryce Young's better than C.J. Stroud. That's actually not what I'm talking about. What I'm saying is Will Levis and Anthony Richardson are not. They just are not, and the film doesn't show any level of comparison point between those 2 guys. It just doesn't. Look, I saw 2 plays that I want to illustrate or talk about and describe. One of the plays in the college football playoff semifinal, Jalen Carter beats the right guard for Ohio State, and he's in C.J. Stroud's face immediately. Stroud jukes him, finds a wide receiver on an unscheduled play down the field for like a 28-yard gain. I don't remember who the receiver was, to be honest with you. A couple of plays later, he did it for, I think, his 2nd touchdown to Harrison on just a ridiculous escape. Jalen Carter was not on the field. Another D tackle had beaten another Ohio State offensive lineman. My point is, the following statements are just false. Stroud can only make on-schedule throws. Watch the Georgia game. He benefited from playing with other NFL talent. I mean, who didn't? Have you ever heard of Alabama? They get all the best players until the last 3 or 4 years with Georgia. Georgia has now equaled them, or in some cases surpassed them, maybe on the defensive side of the ball in terms of overall talent, depth of talent. C.J. Stroud's not super athletic. You ever heard of Tom Brady and Peyton Manning? They've got a combined 9 Super Bowl rings. I mean, they probably couldn't run a 5.5 40 at the time of their last Super Bowl wins. Eli Manning was slightly more athletic than those 2, and he won 2 Super Bowls. So you got 11 combined Super Bowls between guys that, in my opinion, C.J. Stroud is far more athletic than. Let me correct myself on one thing, actually. I want to actually make a tighter point. I don't think the S2 or any combination of cognitive or psychological exams is more than 3% of the consideration. I think it's a talking point for a lot of analysts and evaluators, myself included now because I've done a video about it, as the draft gets closer, when there's just not as much to talk about. The film has been analyzed, the tendencies have been talked about, the combine has been completed, interviews have been done. Stroud played flawless football against the best college football defense that we have seen in a long time, Georgia in 2022. And, were some of those throws designed plays where he knew pretty much where he was going with the ball before the snap? Sure, they were. Guess what? The Kansas City Chiefs are lauded for their ability to do that for Patrick Mahomes. Patrick Mahomes makes off-schedule throws. He escapes pressure in the pocket, extends the play, and he makes throws. Well, shit, C.J. Stroud did that against Georgia. Are we not going to give him credit for that? There's multiple NFL talents on the other side of the football for Georgia in that game. Additionally, to use my Kansas City Chiefs comparison or analogy, I guess, a little further, Kansas City Chiefs just won a Super Bowl by running the football, stopping the run, and getting a defensive touchdown. They did not win the Super Bowl against the Eagles with Patrick Mahomes throwing for 380, with him throwing 5 touchdowns on off-scheduled plays. He had 182 yards passing. 3 TDs, yes, 2 of which were designed routes less than 5 yards to exploit a particular coverage that the Eagles showed an inability to deal with return motion. I'm talking about the touchdown to Kadarius Toney to the right, I think in the first half, and I forget who the second one was in the third quarter. The Chiefs ran the ball by design in that game and stopped the Eagles' run, scored a defensive touchdown. My point is this: you win games with multiple types of approaches, the ability to adapt. I think the Chiefs' game plan was obviously to run the football and stop the run against the Eagles. In my opinion, C.J. Stroud offers more options than Will Levis and Anthony Richardson does right now. And 4 years from now, I think he probably does as well. If Anthony Richardson were to develop and correct some of his accuracy issues, then yes, you might talk about a higher ceiling with him than C.J. Stroud. But if you're trying to win games and you're the Houston Texans in 2023, or you're the Indianapolis Colts, or in some crazy universe he falls to the Raiders or the Falcons, you take C.J. Stroud and you move on. Well, actually, in my opinion, I think the Lions might grab him at 6, but of course, their wide receiver situation just changed, and I think they're in a probably a best player available mode. But the Lions don't plan on drafting in the top 10 or 15 again after this year. They plan on being a really good team, and maybe they would take a C.J. Stroud, even though they've done a fantastic job with Jared Goff. I'm not trying to down Will Levis and Anthony Richardson. I'm just saying the film is obviously weighted in C.J. Stroud's favor. Maybe some of the info leaking out now is from teams in that 5 to 10 range, hoping to see the Colts and the Texans pass on C.J. Stroud. If this fall down the draft board is real, I think the Texans regret it, even though Will Anderson is a fantastic outside linebacker who can have immediate impact, potential, all-pro in his first year. But how do you justify the NFL draft being a legitimate process if the film exists of C.J. Stroud such that it does, and he somehow doesn't get picked by the Texans at 2 if they stay there, the Colts at 4, the Lions, the Raiders, the Falcons? If he gets through that 6, 7, 8, group of selections, how can we say that the NFL draft is a legitimate process when this guy's going out there and just done nothing but win? It showed so much charisma, talent, and athletic ability in the biggest game of his career against Georgia. And if it wasn't, think of it this way, if it wasn't for a super smart Georgia coaching staff with about 9 minutes left, I think, and Ohio State's up 11, getting ready to punt on a 4th and 1 from like their own 32, 34, and they chose to run a fake, which they did actually run the fake, but Kirby Smart called the timeout prior to that, and I believe, and you can correct me if I'm wrong in the comment section, the fake was converted. So essentially it would have been a first down. The game would basically be over. 9 minutes, Ohio State still has the ball. Georgia was fortunate to get a stop there in the first place, and extremely fortunate to get the ball back and then score on the next play. I think a 76-yard touchdown pass on the next play. My point is, C.J. Stroud would have been in the national title game. Are you telling me you don't think that Ohio State team, if Marvin Harrison Jr. is healthy, mind you, can beat TCU? After the way we saw TCU perform, C.J. Stroud could have been a national champion. I'm not here saying that the S2 test in Wonderlic, that was used for years doesn't have a place. But in my opinion, it just it can't be the final data point. And if it is, then NFL front offices are nowhere near as smart as we think they are, period. And you can tell me that, I sound haughty or arrogant there, but the point is, if that is their final data point, if that's the nail, if that they close the folder and that's the top paper inside that folder, I'm talking about pre-computers, right? Or if that's the top line in the Excel file or document, they're not as prepared as we think they are. Then college offenses are actually superior to NFL offenses because they're catering things for their players. And they don't need the one guy to win. And guess what? That one guy for 2023 is not Will Levis, and it's not Anthony Richardson. I think those guys are fantastic talents, particularly Anthony Richardson. Anything you can test on paper, on a computer, or something like that, or verbally, you've got to be able to show me on film. And I do not see film that coincides with a guy who can't make quick decisions at all. My final point will be linked to that Georgia game again. So bear with me. If you enjoyed this, please consider subscribing to the channel. Let me know in the comment section what you think. But my final point is this. Georgia's won 2 straight national championships. They've gone a combined 29-1. In those 30 games, the Georgia defense has allowed 25 touchdown passes. C.J. Stroud and Bryce Young have combined for 8 of those 25 touchdown passes. course, it took Bryce Young 8 quarters to do that. C.J. Stroud lit up Georgia in 4 quarters. The other 27 games, besides the 3 that Stroud and Young played against Georgia, the other 27 games, college quarterbacks have thrown 17 touchdowns and I think 26 interceptions against that Georgia defense. The Texans shouldn't overthink this. Neither should the Colts if the Texans do. C.J. Stroud lit up one of the most historic defenses that college football's ever seen, the only time he saw them. That is preparing for a specific opponent. That is going on the field and processing a look that you think you're going to get and you practice all week, in practice, on the field, in the classroom, on the computer, on your tablet, or verbally talking with your coach while looking at the whiteboard. You do that in all of those different avenues so that it sinks further in the player's mind. That's the coach's job to do that. C.J. Stroud did that against the best defense that he's ever seen in college football. And in my opinion, that's enough evidence for me to indicate he can do that in the NFL. And I think a lot of this talk about the S2, Wonderlic, whatever, is not genuine conversation. You guys let me know if you agree, if you object to these late draft falls down the board, some supposed board that's out there, I guess, in the ether that we don't get to see until draft night. I don't think there's any way C.J. Stroud makes it past 4. And if you're a Houston Texans fan, I don't think you should want him to fall below 2. Appreciate you guys' time. Let me know what you think of the video. If you think other NFL fans would enjoy this commentary video, please consider sharing a link to it out on social media to help the video get more reach.